Good evening, welcome, and thank you for participating in tonight's virtual town hall hosted by Spokane's 3rd District legislators, Senator Andy Billig and Representatives Timm Ormsby and Marcus Riccelli. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions in advance. We'll start tonight's event by relaying those questions to the lawmakers. You may also submit a question live in the comments section of the platform from which you are watching. Please submit your questions now, and we'll try to answer as many as we can over the next hour. Before we get started, however, the lawmakers will give us some brief opening remarks. Senator Billig, would you like to get us started?
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Andy Billig, your state senator. Also have the honor of serving as the Senate Majority Leader. And I look forward to your questions, but thought we'd each just give a quick overview. We've just completed the legislative session 10 days ago. This is the short session year, so it was a 60-day session. It was a really consequential and important session, and really a big session and a great session for Spokane specifically. We passed an important and sustainable transportation package. I know Representative Ormsby is going to talk more about that. We invested over $1 billion in housing and homelessness. We had a really banner year in education, and it's sort of overshadowed by the transportation and housing investments, so it didn't get as much media attention, but really important investments in K-12, particularly in school counselors and school nurses, and supporting students in other ways, but also really the whole education continuum. So not just K-12, but also big advances in making childcare more affordable and accessible, and also in higher ed. And one higher ed note for Spokane that was really great was the investment for Eastern Washington University to be able to create a Bachelor's of Nursing program with 60 slots that'll be in Spokane, in downtown Spokane. And that's important. That's good for Spokane, good for Eastern Washington, but it's also really good for healthcare because there's a shortage of nurses. And then there's so much to talk about that we'll get to in the question. It's just the last thing I wanted to touch on in the introduction is our support of small businesses. And there's a lot this year from helping with unemployment insurance rates to not increase so dramatically, a really big tax break for small businesses with a B&O tax change that will help 125,000 small businesses in our state, and then some targeted small business support for industries like restaurants that were particularly hard hit by the pandemic. We still have a long ways to go to make sure that this recovery out of the pandemic works for everyone. But our state is one of the healthiest and most financially resilient of any state in the country. That's the result of a lot of work and sacrifice by all of the people of Washington State. And we're going to keep at it and keep that progress going. Representative Ormsby, you want to go next?
Thank you, Senator Billig. I had to put my microphone on. Andy covered a lot of ground there. Thank you, Senator Billig. I would say this was the busiest session that I've been involved in, and there are a lot of pluses and minuses to that. We had 60 days. I believe by nearly every measurement, there was more work done this year in 60 days than there was last year in 105 days. And specifically for the budget, which is my primary focus, the amount of time and effort by everyone involved, members, but particularly staff, was grueling in an unprecedented fashion. And I don't feel sorry for myself or anybody else involved because we asked for this job. I will just say that it was difficult to focus on other issues for me outside of the budget simply because there was so much going on. Senator Billig mentioned the transportation budget. Washington was in a good position with our cash reserves and sent over $2.5 billion to the transportation budget so that we could get on with the next generation of our state's transportation needs. We also put substantial money into the capital budget for things like salmon recovery, solar investments, et cetera, on top of what the capital budget normally does. And Representative Riccelli can talk about those things. Senator Billig covered the entire spectrum of education, early learning, big investments, K-12, increases to the program of basic education, higher ed investments. In fact, a new program, a 1% student loan program, so that families aren't suffering the vagaries of high interest bank loans. The thing that I went into the session with and had the most concerns about was, given the economic circumstances that we find ourselves in, how do we address workforce shortages? How do we incentivize employers and employees into taking those jobs that are they're very critical, the ones that we rely on for the delivery of the critical government services and programs that we have. And we did that through increases in vendor rates to the contractors, the vendors that we have that provide, particularly in the social services, healthcare, and behavioral health space. We're proud of the fact that we got those wages up for workers that work for those contractors of the state. And that was a big improvement. We think it will go a long way to addressing workforce shortages and give more money in the people's pockets that do those very important jobs. And I would just conclude by observing that these two gentlemen, Senator Billig and Representative Riccelli, are just a delight to work with. And our focus when we're together or separately is what is best for Spokane? What can we do to help address the issues back home? That is our focus, and it's been a privilege of my professional career to work with them to do just that. Representative Riccelli?
Well, thank you, Representative Ormsby, and I'd echo those sentiments. It's a great honor to work with these legislators and work with the community to come up with our priorities. I think we passed a really robust operating budget, supplemental capital budget, and excited that we passed a transportation package, which I'll touch upon. I'm happy to be back in Spokane. I got to spend some time in Olympia this session, particularly for the final week there. It's one upshot of the remote session that I'm hoping will carry forward has been the remote testimony. Remote testimony has allowed people to participate in the legislature without having to take a day off of work or drive across a pass. And since its implementation, we've seen a number of people testifying and weighing the number skyrocket. But yeah, I did want to mention one of our biggest accomplishments in Olympia this year was the passage of the new transportation package, the Move Ahead Washington package. I was happy to be one of the negotiators from the House side and got to attend over 90 listening sessions to learn about our state's transportation priorities. And this 16-year, $17 billion package is really focused on 4 priorities: preserving our infrastructure, reducing carbon emissions, expanding safe, accessible, and affordable options to travel, and addressing harm caused by past transportation policies. And we did a lot to maintain our existing infrastructure, putting over $3 billion in preservation and maintenance. We did a lot of exciting things, like there's $50 million for bus rapid transit on the Division Street line that's going to come to fruition. Senator Billig, we worked as a team, but Senator Billig took the lead on creating a new Liberty Park land bridge that will connect our historically Black East Central neighborhood with the Sprague Business District. So there's a lot of really good stuff we're excited about. There's a couple other things that I worked on personally from helping provide more options for our students to have free meals in schools. That was one highlight for me, to making sure our creative community can be successful with the film tax incentive. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that and then the capital budget investments, I think were very good for a supplemental budget. There were some great projects like a new behavioral health center that's going to go into the old Hilliard Library. We're looking at Logan Elementary with Senator Billig's lead is looking at expanding ECAP slots and early learning, and also adding a health clinic. So there's a number of these things we'll get into tonight, but basically just thank you for taking the time. I am maybe a little off my game because the Zags game didn't turn out the way we all wanted, but I'm super excited to be talking to you all tonight, and I am proud to be part of this team.
So let's go on with questions. Aaron, you want to take it away, or should we take some from the stream here?
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll jump right into a question from Dawn. And Dawn says, thank you for the support to increase school staffing and enrollment stabilization. I'd be interested in learning more about plans to continue support for learning recovery and filling the gaps in transportation and special education funding.
Well, I can take that. His comments about how we work together, and we definitely do that. And one of the ways that we help to effectively and efficiently represent the people of Spokane is to, we all have different expertise areas. And so we share, we lean on each other in different areas. And of course, we all, have to work on everything. We all have to vote on everything, but we definitely, you can't be an expert in every area. So I always say we've got about 10,000 different issues we work on, and we're really experts in probably 4 or 5 of them. So one of the areas that I take the lead on for our 3rd district team is education. And so I'll take that question. So there was a lot, and I mentioned in the opening that, I think that it got overshadowed a little bit. In any other year, that would be the headline, is the incredible investments in education. And the school nurses and counselors is a big one. We did school stabilization funding, which was important because there's a lot of instability for the school districts from a financial perspective, but just not knowing as they were doing their budgets, what was going to be the pandemic situation. And what we didn't want to have a situation, especially in a tough hiring environment, that schools lay off a bunch of teachers and then the students, we actually did a little bit better in terms of getting kids back into school and then may have been expected, and then not have the teachers there or not have them there for the next year. So we gave some stabilization funding. And it's not to say that we're done, because we certainly, one other one I was going to mention is that we also helped on transportation, school transportation. So there were some big investments there. But the thing is, and you mentioned in the question, the special education funding, we have done, especially in our 2-year budget, we did a significant additional investment for special education. But we're not done with school funding. We're probably never going to be done with school funding. And so we've got more work to do, and special ed is one of the areas in particular that I think that we'll continue working on in the future.
And Aaron, excuse me for butting in, but I would just say one of the dynamic things that happens in Washington State is we have a central funding model, meaning the state is responsible for funding the program of basic education, but 295 locally elected school boards are the ones that decide the priorities for that school district. So on the learning loss issue, for example, each school district is going to take that in a direction that serves their students best. And it's hard to answer specifically outside of the large amount of resources that went to school districts this year, how they will decide to disperse them to the benefit of their students and constituents in the school districts that live there.
All right, next we'll go to a question from Dennis. And Dennis asks, if there's a shortage of nurses, why was legislation supported to reduce their flexibility to accept overtime hours?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take the lead on that. I think this is probably referring to a bill that I introduced and sponsored. Look, I think I'm really excited about the nursing slots we're added. I'm excited about all the investments we're doing in our workforce, but we need to make sure we're treating our nurses fairly. And it's not going to help us if there's a revolving door because of burnout, because of working conditions. We need to make sure that, people have meal and rest breaks, that there's staffing plans in place that allow for folks to, have a sustainable career. And too many of our nurses are leaving the profession because obviously there's been heavy pressures put on them during the pandemic. And I think on the front end, we definitely need to continue to do what we're doing, investing in workforce. But again, we will not make a dent into this issue and have an adequate workforce if we do not make sure that there's fair conditions for our frontline workers. And so that's the purpose. I think that discussion can continue on, but that bill did not move forward. I think there was parts of that bill that could really do some things that could significantly improve working conditions, that we could get both the labor side and the management side together to agree upon some things to make sure we have better outcomes. And that we're not, I came to the issue because classmates I went to high school with were calling me in tears because of their conditions. One of my friends who I play indoor soccer with is an is a ER nurse, and was talking about the mental toll of zipping out body bags during the pandemic. So this is a serious issue, and I think we need to work on both ends of the equation.
And I want to thank Representative Riccelli for his efforts and leadership on this. And our dad was famous for saying, behave as though you're going to be doing this job in 5 years. And by extension, behave as though the people we're expecting to do this job are going to be able to do it in 5 years. And the pandemic, as Marcus said, took a very heavy toll. And it was an effort to maintain the workforce that we have, and then incrementally increase it in the years to come so that we have adequate staffing in our hospitals and they're able to make decisions based on having rest and having proper nutrition and hydration, things they make sure their patients get.
One other, I saw another question in the chat there from, I don't know if it was the same dentist or a different dentist, but a great question about how so much of the money that was available for investment, and a lot of it was one time, and how do we make sure that we do that responsibly, invest that and not invest it all in ongoing programs, because it would be irresponsible if we took a bunch of one-time money, either federal money or other one-time money, and said we're going to invest in some program that's going to go on for the next 20 years. And so, Representative Ormsby is the chair of the House Appropriation Committee, so he's the House budget writer, and he and the rest of the budget teams did an amazing job of balancing exactly that. And so that we were able to invest in a bunch of one-time things with the one-time money and only use the ongoing. So for example, there was one of the ways the transportation package was able to be funded, which was a home run for Spokane, was by use of one-time money, because that's construction money, so it's one time. Same with a lot of the housing money, could be one-time money. And so we're definitely having that in mind. And then the other thing I wanted to mention about just how responsible this budget is, because not only did we keep that in mind about the one-time money, but also left a very large reserve, $4.5 billion. And that's important, so we have money to address if we have problems, or if there's revenue downfalls in the future, or pandemic or some other problem flares up, but also helps us to retain our AAA bond rating. We have the highest bond rating you can have as a state, the highest the state that we've ever had in the history of the state of Washington, because of the responsible budgets that have passed. And with this budget and the large reserve, we're going to make sure that bond rating, which saves taxpayers money because we can borrow at a lower interest rate, and make sure that bond rating and responsible budgeting stays in place.
Thank you, Senator Billig. I'd like to add one quick thing to your very good analysis, and that is we are required to balance over a 4-year period. And at the end of this upcoming 2-year period, which will be a year from this June 30th, we'll have 9.4% reserve. And specifically to your question about going into the future, the projection is at the end of the next 2-year cycle, we will have a 10.7% reserve. And at the end of the following 2-year cycle, a 12.4% reserve. So it is increasing incrementally over time. So we do feel that we put one-time money to good use, and we have reserves that will be growing in the coming years.
All right. Up next, we'll go to Michael. Michael asks, do you see health inequity as an issue within this district and Greater Spokane? What is being done from a legislative standpoint to address health inequity?
Well, I'll take a jump at that and let my colleagues pop in as well. But first, I think we're shifting, and we're really paying attention to social determinants of health. And that includes looking at, wellness, preventative, investing in prevention, making sure people have access to things. That's something I'm passionate about, like oral health. We made significant investments in behavioral health, making sure we have capacity, but also the workforce that can see people and work to help them stay healthy. For me, though, I think really, yes, we have significant inequities in the 3rd district and across our state. So that's why we remain focused on, as Tim would say a lot, our budget is our biggest, policy bill, and it's a reflection of our values. And we're making significant investments into the workforce, but also making sure people have access. For me, it's one thing we went through expansion in Washington State, so many more people have access to Medicaid, et cetera, to Apple Health, but you also have to have the providers that they can see. And then we have to have, people in our community working with them to make sure they can get into appointments, make sure that they can get those tracks. And for me, one of the most important things is that early intervention with healthy, active lifestyles for our youngest, to make sure they're getting those preventative screenings. And then we backfill that with actual real dollars that can make this happen and make sure that we have affordable, accessible, quality healthcare for all. And when I say healthcare, I don't mean treating people only. I mean actually a focus on wellness and prevention. But thank you, Dr. Surratt. I recognize your name and your work, and appreciate your interest, and look forward to continuing to partner with you.
Yes, and if I can add, since Marcus quoted me, I'll quote him. The zip code that you're born in should not determine your health and prosperity and longevity, and unfortunately it does. And just a shout out to Senator Billig, who is got in the capital budget a health clinic in the Title I elementary school that my children, all three of my kids, attended. This is about getting services, trusted services by folks. If the three of us were going to show up somewhere in our sport coats, or if someone in a lab coat was going to show up, it might be a little intimidating to some folks. So getting trusted messengers, the word that they can go and access healthcare without question and without judgment. And when we can do that at a local level, and a bunch of this budget is invested in getting trusted messengers into communities to deliver that message.
I got to add to one thing I forgot. We have to be creative, and bringing up school-based health centers is really important, but also telehealth is a means, something that I've been working on to make sure people can have access in ways that might not be traditional, but for behavioral health, that can be really important. And so I think we need to be really creative and innovative. We're the state of technology, so using that technology to our advantage for good health outcomes, I think, is important.
A really interesting question just popped up. I've not heard any of you challenge your party. I guess that's not a question, but a comment. So I wanted to touch on that. A couple thoughts on that. First of all, to me, the biggest goal, I think, in sort of the area that you're touching on is really not looking for places to challenge your party. Certainly, you need to have the courage to do that when appropriate. But it's about reaching across the aisle and working in a bipartisan fashion. And I'm really proud of how we've done that. Over 90% of the bills are bipartisan. Even when they're not bipartisan, we had a bill at the end that was about giving legislative employees the right to organize. And it was a party line vote, but even the Senate, minority leader, Senator Braun, on the floor of the Senate said, I'm not going to vote for this bill, but I really appreciated the outreach from across the aisle and the incorporation of our ideas and addressing our concerns in this bill. And so even sometimes when it's party line, it still resulted from bipartisan work. And when the time comes where you need to stand up to somebody in your own party and say, hey, I'm not going to go along with this, that you also need to be ready to do that. And certainly there are lots of examples of that. We had one this year on an emergency powers bill that I helped to write and to pass out of the Senate that some people in our party were not happy with, but it was the right thing to do. But one other thing I want to just say about bipartisanship, going back to that, is there are going to be times, and they often get the headlines, so I think there's this sense that it's often very partisan. That is the exception, not the rule. As I said, it's less than 10% of the time. But I'm not going to apologize. When we have some important bill related to women's reproductive rights or gun safety or something like that, and I know that the overwhelming majority of Washingtonians and overwhelming majority of constituents that I represent support that bill, I'm not going to not pass the bill. because somebody from the other side isn't going to vote for it. In those cases, it's okay to just stand up and vote what you want for, even if it's just with your own party, and vote for what you know is right.
And I think the time to do the challenging is internally. And I don't know of, I have not seen in my time a lot of challenges. Those things remain in-house, but the challenges go on internally. And that is how we air our grievances and get to consensus, is by expressing our differences and challenging each other as legislators and as a caucus and a chamber in order to get the right results for the people of Washington.
All right. We're getting an awful lot of questions about housing and homelessness. So both in the survey and in the chat. So I'll go ahead and ask one from Greg. Greg asks, what are you doing at the state level to help solve our housing crisis? We need more than just low-income housing. We also need new housing stock that meets the needs of our lower income residents that don't qualify for housing subsidies.
That's an excellent question. Thanks, Greg. What we're needing and what we have to have and what we're working on is partnerships with our local governments. So the state can create pots of money and make them available to communities, to not-for-profits. But there needs to be a place for it to land in the local community. And we need to strengthen and bolster our partnerships with local governments on all of the fronts that you mentioned, from those that are currently not housed to folks that don't qualify for subsidized housing, and those that are struggling with potential foreclosure, for example. All of those things are included in the budget, and we set up criteria for that money to go out. What we need on the other side of it is responsive and receptive landing spots in our communities. Now, we can use the bully pulpit here locally to make certain that the local governments and the private not-for-profits that really do a good job here, that they're aware of what's available and work in unison in order to get that done. Really focusing money in a particular area has tended to not work out pretty well, because it ends up being the area that who is ever developing the policy or working on that budget issue formats it so that it works out well for where they live. Well, that is not a great state policy, because it is not going to work out well the same in Walla Walla as it is in Bellingham, the same in Spokane as it is in Vancouver. So what we need are good, strong local partnerships in order to put that in play. And that's something that we have worked on. And we've really got to step up our game, and so do our local governments, in order to be able to put this money to use, because there is money available for the entire spectrum of housing challenges we face.
And I'll just say, I mean, Representative Riccelli and Representative Ormsby both are leaders on housing. And when you look at this budget, it is just filled with housing and homelessness prevention investments that are going to help throughout the state, but particularly here in Spokane. And Representative Riccelli has worked really hard on the capital budget side, which is where we actually build things. And those are kind of the two areas, operating budget and capital budget, where we do housing. I was going to point out just one housing bill that I worked on. There was really specific to Spokane and Tacoma. Senator Trudeau from Tacoma was the prime sponsor. We worked together on it. And, many of you probably know this, but 70% of downtown Spokane is covered in surface parking lots, and many of them not used very often. And this is prime real estate that can be used for a better use, and particularly for housing. And so this bill will create a tax incentive to help incentivize developers to take the underutilized surface parking lots and turn them into mixed-use development or housing, and particularly sort of middle housing and affordable housing. It'll take probably a few months for this thing to get rolling, but already have talked with some developers who are excited about it and think that that difference will make the difference for them to be able to pencil out new projects for housing in downtown Spokane.
All right. Up next, we will go to Jerome, and Jerome has a question about small businesses. Jerome says small businesses were hit hard during the pandemic, and many did not survive. What will you do to make sure that Spokane small businesses have the support they need to make it?
Well, I'll start with that one. Just I mentioned in the open, just we actually have just a huge focus on small business this year. Again, I think some of the other transportation and housing sort of were the headlines, and so it took over a little bit for all that we did with small business. But the B&O tax change is really significant. Over 125,000 businesses will be will save money and be helped by that. The unemployment insurance, and then the targeted increases targeted supports, like with liquor licenses for restaurants. But the other thing I want to touch on again is on transportation. Transportation investments help all businesses and almost all citizens. So, I run a small business, the Spokane Indians baseball team. Well, you know what? Our business doesn't do very well if people don't have a way to get there. And so when I think about all of the businesses that may be served by people riding transit. We hear from downtown businesses that their employees get there by transit. They need strong transit systems for them to be able to get there. When I think about retail businesses or event businesses who need good roads, efficient, avoiding congestion. And then when I think about, bike and pedestrian infrastructure, which is so vital for employees, workers, and for the businesses themselves. That was a huge business investment and people investment in the transportation package.
And this, I totally am completely sympathetic to the businesses that were hit really hard right at the outset. And I think, both the federal government especially, but the state to a lesser extent struggled with getting out that money in the right way to the right places. We perfected that in a short amount of time. But what it reminded me was for those businesses that maybe made decisions late in 2019 or early 2020 that would maybe increase their debt, for example. And then this unforeseen pandemic hits. It was very much like having an unanticipated medical issue come up. It reminded me a lot of folks going bankrupt over medical bills. It was just, you feel awful. There isn't anything you can do. Those circumstances cannot be altered after the fact. But I know it continues to be a major focus in the legislature, even though now that we're concluded, now it's our job to ride the state agencies to make sure that those resources get out. And we have the unique benefit of where those resources landed was in the Department of Commerce, and the director of the Department of Commerce is former State Senator Lisa Brown, who Andy and I had the privilege of serving with, and Mark has had the privilege of working for as an aide. And we know that those Spokane values are going to be reflected in what the Department of Commerce does, and have a high level of confidence in her ability to serve our community.
I would just add just some specifics because on some dollar amounts, $100 million for the hospitality businesses, expands efforts to support small business innovation and competitiveness, $39 million. Andy mentioned the liquor license fee. We actually have, a booming creative economy. We passed the film tax incentive. We increased it. So I think there was a number of things specifically. And we recognize small business is still the economic engine of the state, and we're going to continue to work to support those small businesses. And we know that they were hit hard, and support that workforce that was hit hard.
Up next, we get a question from Madeline. And Madeline says 1 in 3 college students experience food insecurity nationally. Will you commit to making food insecurity a higher education priority issue for the 2023 legislative session?
Well, thank you for that question. I'll take that. I've actually met with students, and they really were applauding the work that we've been doing to bring thousands of more students under the free breakfast and lunch with the bill, House Bill 1878 that I passed. But they said students are not just K-12. And the stories I've heard about our community college students, our 4-year students, some of the creative things they're doing. Like I heard at SFCC, they have a food pantry where they repackage unused items that students can get. I love all that creativity. I just saw a picture of St. Martin students that were raising money for the softball team and getting a food donation, but we can do better. And I think I am absolutely committed to that. And what I asked the students I met with, and Madeline, I'd ask you to join a group of folks, is to come with some ideas and solutions, and let's meet and talk to you about it. This is one of the areas where I think you all could help really workshop this and come up with some ideas on how we can be. We know that there are a lot of food insecure students. I have horror stories talking with college friends that were on, vitamins and top ramen, and that shouldn't be the case. Or they're supporting their family and they have all those pressures. So I look forward to that discussion, and I'd like to make that a priority. And thank you for bringing it to our attention. It's not just K-12 when we say students. It's a continuum of students that are struggling.
And just to Senator Billig's earlier point about the expertise that we try and take issues on, as soon as the food issue came up, of course, Representative Riccelli came right to mind as one of our very well-known food fighters within our caucus, the House Democratic Caucus. And your point is very well made. And when these issues have risen, we have made strong investments in higher ed for students that have housing issues over the last couple of years. And, I'm just the awareness that you all are bringing, and I appreciate your knowledge base coming in and informing us. As Marcus said, we're happy to hear about getting to solutions. It doesn't always involve money, but it does involve partnerships, and it involves trust. And both on the part of, especially on the part of the student that's looking for it, because no one wants to face that stigma of not being able to get proper nutrition.
One thing that might be interesting, we've referenced a few times sort of our different policy areas we work on. Maybe we should just take a moment and do that. It's hard for Timm because he's in charge of the operating budget, so he is an expert in every part of it and has an amazing retention on the numbers in particular and all the places that we've made significant investments, but also a pension policy expert. Timm, do you want to just give your quick one we'll each go through?
Yeah, I've got a couple of really sexy portfolios. One is workers' compensation, which I think is very critical to maintain Washington's really good record and to keep rates affordable for employers and certainty for injured workers. And as Senator Billig mentioned, also pensions, which, believe it or not, have a huge impact on the state's ability to borrow money. If we are not making good on our pension investments, then we get downgraded by the bond houses and the credit rating agencies. And right now we have the highest credit rating that a public entity can have, AAA plus by one, AA plus by another rating agencies. And we have that because we are exercising fiduciary responsibility and tempering the wants that our members and their constituents with the reality of limited resources and getting them driven out in the best ways. And then the operating budget takes up a considerable amount of my time.
I just go to Marcus next, but I see that we had a comment from Senator Twana Nobles from the 28th Legislative District, who is apparently watching us. And what an honor to have her on. She's a star and doing amazing work for the people of our state. This year, she helped to make diapers more affordable for low-income families in our state. And I just really have enjoyed getting to know her and working with her. So thanks for joining us, Senator Nobles. Marcus, you want to do your policy areas?
Sure. I serve on transportation, capital budget, and healthcare. And I didn't mention that, so I'm a member of our leadership team as the House Majority Whip. I really focus a lot on healthcare. I think a lot of our economy is based on the healthcare sector here in Spokane. I think policy interventions on how we improve as a community on our overall health is important. So I've really drilled down, and I work part-time in community health too. And so that keeps me plugged in. And so that's a big focus. Been honored to, spend the last 1.5 to 2 years working on a transportation package. And before that, on connecting Washington, which helped complete the get the funding for the North Spokane corridor, so we can complete it and bring some other funding here. So those are some of my main areas. I've also worked on a lot of labor issues of late, and I really enjoyed that work, partnering with our working families.
And I mentioned education, so K-12 education. I was one of the what was called the McCleary negotiators. There were 8 legislators out of the 147 that helped to negotiate the big funding plan for basic education several years ago. So K-12, that was a deep dive into K-12 for about 2 years. Early learning also related to education and childcare. And then voting rights, when Senate Democrats came back into the majority, and we had 5 years ago, and we had Democrats at control of both chambers, we really made some major step forwards on voting access and helping to make sure everyone who's allowed to vote has easy access to vote. And so that I was able to work very intensely on that. And then sort of related to that is campaign finance reform, which is an area I've worked on. As majority leader, I don't get to do as much policy work, but I still, kind of look after those areas. And then randomly, aviation biofuels, and I'm the chair of the Washington State Sustainable Aviation Biofuels Work Group. I joined that work group about 7 years ago when it first started, and it was before we had Zoom and all this great technology. And we had a conference call basically, and I was dropped from the conference call for a few minutes. And it was during that time that I was elected chair of the work group, and I've never left that position. So I'm glad technology's come further, but it didn't save me in that moment. All right, let's get back to questions.
And if I can interrupt, sorry, Aaron, I just saw there was a question from Dennis Flynn about government overhead, and I wanted to address that because the perception is that there's this overbloated bureaucracy. And I would go back a couple of years, and I bet the percentages are even smaller now. About 10% of the resources that we deliver services with are within state government. The rest are going to hospitals, doctors, nurses, teachers, school districts, not-for-profits that deal with behavioral health and substance use disorder, et cetera. All of, a not-for-profit that's very efficient has about a 15% overhead, and the state operates, and I would guess in this last 2-year cycle, at much less even than the 10% that it was a few years ago. That is a good administrative rate, because if people expect transparency and accountability in government, and they do, and they should, then it has to be done right. And our state employees do that, and I will defend them and the work that they do. While none of us are perfect, and none of the systems we can create are perfect, we should be lauding our state employees for the work that they do to address accountability and transparency for the legislators, because we press them on that constantly, and to the public, so that they are assured that their tax resources is open and transparent, how they're being spent, and that we're accountable for those expenditures.
All right. Up next, we have a question from Jim. Jim asks, has there been any update on the WA CARES Act language? I'll be within retirement age in about 7 years or so, and want to know if I can be fully vested in the system from whenever it starts until then.
So we made a number of changes in the WA CARES program. So I guess 2 things that happened this year. The first was to make some of very specific changes that were known and fairly easy to make. And so we made those. And then was to delay the program start date by 18 months. And so that the Long-Term Care Commission can continue to work on the issues, the remaining issues, and one that you brought up particularly about for people closer to retirement and how they can invest. Also, portability is another one. So anyway, all of those issues are going to be looked at in depth, and then the commission will bring back recommendations to the 2023 legislature, and that legislature can then implement additional changes before it goes into effect in mid-2023.
And I wanted to thank Dennis for clarifying his question. I didn't understand it. My speed reading skills are not what they should be.
I want to take a moment to recognize Candy Craig, thanking us for the one-time 3% increase for Plan 1 retires. No, thank you, Candy. Your advocacy and so many at RPEC and, so many retired educators, et cetera, really made that a top issue and one that we were able to address thanks to the work of the full legislature.
All right. Up next, we'll go to a question from Larry. And Larry says, what do you think was the most important climate action in this year's session?
Well, there's a lot to choose from, so I think we're all thinking. I mean, I was impressed by, and it really started with the governor's budget that we then carried on in the final budget. It was the investments in solar and electric vehicles. And, we're in a transitional period. And we have to, if we want this transition to keep going, and we can see how important this is. We know it's important for climate, but having energy independence is also important when, related to independence from other countries that we might rely on for oil. And we're seeing the impacts from a global situation in Ukraine and with Russia impacting gas prices around the world. And the more we can be energy independent, the more we can protect our citizens and protect the planet at the same time. But the other one I'll mention is this great transportation package that we passed that has all of these important investments for Spokane and around the state. Is about a third of the funding is based on the Climate Commitment Act. And this is the Cap and Invest program that passed last year. And it's the proceeds from that program that are going to help to fund things like bus rapid transit on Division and bike and pedestrian infrastructure and the land bridge over I-90, and free up other funds to do things like speeding up the North Spokane corridor. So I think that the results of that major package that we passed last year is just starting to bear fruits this year.
Yeah, I would just add, I just want to add to what Andy said and say that, we're putting money towards expansion of multimodal transportation. Washingtonians deserve convenient, accessible options so they can use what works best for them. But that is while they're also reducing carbon emissions. And so we're investing in zero emissions ferry technology, bicycle and pedestrian grants for electrical. We're investing in electrical vehicle charging stations. We're repairing fish passage barriers. And again, $3 billion for increasing reliable transit service. So I think that was our biggest effort. And I think the package protects our quality of life and secures the future for the next generation of Washingtonians.
And I just pipe in real quickly by just echoing Senator Billig's point on electric vehicles and solar investments, $600 million over the course of the next 3 years. That is a commitment, and credit goes to Governor Inslee for being a pain in the backside about this. Frankly, took more calls from the governor, which was an honor. I am deeply honored, but he was very adamant, especially at the end, to almost too late. But we're able to figure out how we make those investments and make that commitment. But to the here and now. Because as Representative Riccelli said, investments for the future in the here and now. Salmon are kind of our canary in the coal mine that let us know how we're doing on climate and how it affects our ecosystems. And huge $100 million over just in the next year alone to really enhance salmon recovery. And in fact, efforts of reintroduction in the Upper Columbia. For salmon recovery were also a part of this budget. We need to take those indications from our ecosystem about what climate is doing for them, learn those lessons. We do need to change our habits and address what is undeniably, this climate change phenomenon that we are going through that has both security and economic implications. But taking care of the ecosystem right now is one of the things to keep it preserved. So it is also there for future generations of Washingtonians.
All right. And we've got some time left. So if you've got a question, please drop it in the chat with whatever platform you're watching us. So next one comes in from the survey earlier. During the pandemic, many elderly in Spokane struggled to receive services. What can be done to ensure people like me can access food, healthcare, and other necessities when we need them and during the next emergency?
I'll take a first jump at that. Food insecurity, again, is something that I've been working on. In the pandemic, I was happy to be part of what kind of fell into an effort called Spokane Food Fighters, where we were delivering food and connecting folks with restaurant quality meals, but then started connecting delivery with partners like Second Harvest, et cetera, and with a USDA program that we need to get food to doors of folks. But I also think this is another piece where if people can safely, including our elderly, access transit to get where they need to go, I think that's important to connect to services. But one of the things I learned from that process is that through technology and through volunteerism, our community can do amazing things. And we just need to come up with the resources and continue to make sure our food banks are stocked and that we're making investments there, and make sure that, there's so much goodness I found from that in our community to help connect people with services and make sure that they're getting food. And one of the big things, sometimes it's not just about that food, that connection that people have at the doorsteps with the elderly folks that they're serving is really important to their health and well-being too. It keeps the connection to the community. We need to make sure that people can age in their own homes if they want to, in dignity, but also, do it in a way where they can have interaction with the outside world. And you know what? We can learn a lot. We need more intergenerational connections. I think the schools are also community places, our senior centers, et cetera, where we can get our youth involved in volunteerism and they can benefit from that. So I know I went a bit on a tangent, but I really think it's important from a behavioral health standpoint and wellness, not just to make sure that people are getting adequate nutrition. When folks show up the door, they can know when people are struggling too, and help, be basically community health workers and checking in on folks. So that's one way.
Yeah, and that and I know for our folks that, especially during the pandemic, this is where community we have to build community. We have to be looking out for each other and our neighbors. And I haven't seen Mrs. Jones lately. Need to maybe knock on her door. And I think investing in each other, this is critical. And that's something we can do on our block, in our neighborhood, in our local communities. And it's going to take all of us to really fully realize a full recovery from what has just been 2 years of hell.
I thought I would just do a shout out. Another elected official that's joined us is Tom Kunis, who's the Spokane County Assessor. Thanks for your comment there, and thanks for your advocacy on House Bill 1629. I was glad that got over the finish line, and you helped a great deal on that. So thanks for your service to our community and for working on that bill. I thought it was an interesting question from Ralph asking what tables are left, or what issues were left on the table that we need to address in 2023. And we mentioned there's some education issues and special education, but I really look at it as, Washington is leading the way in so many different areas. And we've made so much progress over the last 4 or 5 years to help build opportunity and prosperity for the people of Washington State. So I really look at it as building blocks, so that we've created a foundation. We need to keep building, whether it's in education or housing, mental health, and so many of the other areas, childcare, healthcare, that have gotten attention, but really that we need to keep going further to make sure that we're helping everybody. There's one particular one I'll just mention that may be a little bit in the weeds, but some of the policy wonks out there will like. We had a really interesting situation last year where the Supreme Court, in the middle of a session, handed us a big bundle of tough policy to handle with the Billig decision. The Supreme Court basically invalidated the drug possession laws in Washington State. And in a very short period, in the middle of our session, something that we would normally spend, years studying and doing outreach and to come up with solutions we had to do in a really short amount of time. We did come up with a bipartisan solution. I don't think it was perfect, but one of the things that we did in that solution, because we knew we didn't have all of the time to figure it out, was to put a 2-year sunset on that solution, on that sort of a short-term fix. And so that 2 years is going to come due in the next session. And I think the solution to the Blake decision on how we as a state handle drug possession laws will be one of the big issues of the next session. And I don't know if Marcus or Tim, if you've got other issues you think will be coming up in 2023.
I mean, I'd be happy to come on that. One of the things I wanted to take a second to mention too, though, there's a lot of interesting things going on locally that have implications on how our community moves forward. And we passed a bill to move to 5 county commissioners, and that's coming online here soon. And I just wanted to take an opportunity tonight to talk about that's a really important change, and I think will impact how policy is done at the local level too. I'm looking ahead. I think we need to continue on making sure that we're addressing the most important things. And that's what I learned at Gonzaga about the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and making sure that if we want to get people to a place where we can thrive and our community to thrive, we got to make sure that folks have their housing needs met, that they have adequate health care and access to that they're feeling like they can get to nutrition. And so we need to do a better job. And I think a lot of our focus should be continuing to make sure that our most vulnerable are taken care of.
And it's only been 2 weeks since we adjourned sine die. And I've learned a lot to take into the next legislative session. And there isn't a lot of official work, legislative bills and budgets, et cetera, that we're able to do during the interim period. But that's why the legislature convenes every year. I think we do have a lot of unmet needs. We have a lot of social and political dynamics to address, economic dynamics that will be different in 2 weeks from now than they are today, and will certainly be different by the end of the year going into next year than they are today. And being on our toes and being nimble and having those issues reinforced by well-informed constituents like we've heard from tonight is critical in us making determination on what are our priorities going to be for the next legislative session.
All right, we've got time for one last question. We want to cheer you up, Representative Riccelli. So could you tell us about a decision coming regarding the time change?
Oh, sure. So a few years back, I sponsored legislation to move us to permanent daylight saving time. It was something that was of great interest. Of course, there's a lot of important things out there, but this, for whatever reason, struck a chord with a lot of people. We know that changing our clocks can add all kinds of craziness to our schedules, can cause an increase in cardiac arrests, strokes, collisions, car collisions, etc. I like it lighter, longer, because I think, we should live healthy, active lifestyles that gives more opportunity for people to recreate. So we passed that, but we can't move to permanent daylight saving time unless there's federal action taken. We're already on permanent daylight saving time, or we're already on daylight saving time 8 months of the year. So Congress took action, unprecedented, unanimous, and I think people want to see that Congress isn't a broken clock and that we can get something done. It's moved on to the House, so there's some robust discussion. I think everybody can agree we shouldn't switch the clocks. Whether we should be permanent standard time and permanent daylight time, I think is getting more scrutiny now because it passed the Senate, and I look forward to seeing if that could move forward. But it does need to pass now the House of Representatives and get signed by the president to allow us to hashtag ditch the switch. And I would hope that we can move to permanent daylight saving time and keep it lighter longer so that we can enjoy those great summer nights and make sure we have more light later.
Yeah, and I want to compliment Representative Riccelli for being tenacious, and this was, and it's a lesson about how long things can take. Representative Riccelli's bill was in 2018 or 19. I can't remember, but we can't do daylight savings time as a state until the federal government allows us to. And this recent action is going to now, with state law in place, could actually happen. And while my wife and I do not agree about whether it should be standard or daylight, we do both agree that the time change it's time to get rid of it. I support Representative Riccelli's daylight savings time permanent.
Well, we found out what the wedge issue in the Ormsby household is. I'll exploit that one for sure. Okay, it looks like we're at the end. I wanted to, maybe we can each just do a quick closing. I just wanted to thank everybody. Great questions. We work for you, so we can only do our jobs well when we hear from you. I appreciate people asking that we keep doing these. I think they're terrific. I also want to get back to in-person town hall meetings. And so you'll keep hearing from us. I will mention that there are some restrictions for ethics reasons, for good reasons, that restricts some of the actions that can be done in an election year, particularly for the House members who are up this year. So there may be some reason that we can't at some point do something like this, but we can always respond when you contact us, and you'll see our email addresses coming up. We read and respond to all the emails, and you will see us out and about. We do things called mobile offices where we show up at farmers markets and other public places. We'll give notice of that, and you can come have some one-on-one conversations, and then just keep in touch via email or phone as well. Thanks so much for all the great questions. And whether we agree or disagree, these dialogues are really important for us, and also hopefully a good way for all of you to gain more information about the process and about what's happening.
Excellent.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. A robust democracy can only exist with an active and engaged citizenry. Thanks for doing your part. I know there's some questions and some concerns we didn't address. I'm happy. Please email us, and we'll follow up. And just appreciate the gift of time and knowledge that you provide through your questions as we try and make our way through complex policy initiatives.
I want to compliment you on how well informed the questions were, how well informed our constituents are. And let there be no mistake. Nobody gets away with anything in this business if we have a very active and engaged constituency. I want to thank you for that.
Have a good evening, everyone. Thanks.
Good night.
Night.